Johannes, good morning. It seems like a dream. We're already on the last day. It went so fast, but that's usually a sign that we have been very engaged and time didn't pass as slowly as we normally have it. Today we're going to basically wind up the whole meeting, and we're going to make a presentation by a philosopher on the embodiment and intersubjectivity. Sean Gallagher is professor of philosophy at the University of Central Florida, and he has been doing a lot of research on different fields that have philosophical implications, and is the chief editor-in-chief of a journal on phenomenology and the cognitive science, which was founded by Nathalie Depras and Francisco Varela. And Sean Gallagher has been working in different areas with Francisco Varela, so we're having almost a representation of Francisco here. So thank you, Sean, for coming and sharing.
Your Holiness, I would like to say what an honor it is to be able to come here and to be in dialogue with you. I would also like to thank the organizers of the Mind and Life Institute for inviting me, and I know how much hard work went into organizing a meeting like this. I would also like to note that my knowledge of Buddhism and meditation is really what I've learned here in the last few days. So I have just a little knowledge, but very high quality. I'm going to talk about two items, and I'll explain what I mean by embodiment and intersubjectivity. And I should say that I'm a
embodiment body. Then as intersubjectivity the subject.
Okay. And I will have some questions at the end. The questions will involve issues having to do with how the body might have an effect on meditation, and perhaps the effect that other people might have on meditation. So questions like, do posture and bodily movement affect meditational practice or experience? Is meditation different when it is practiced with others? But I'll come back to these questions. So here's an outline of what I will be talking about. I'll first talk about embodiment. And what I mean by that is how the body affects or helps to shape our experience and our cognition. Secondly, I'll talk about intersubjectivity. This is a term that comes from the phenomenological tradition in philosophy, and it means interpersonal social interactions having to do with such things. And there are basically two issues. One is called social cognition, which is studied in science, in psychology, and cognitive sciences. And the question is...
Can you explain what social cognition is? Yeah.
Well, it addresses the question of how we understand other people. So how do I understand your behavior and your mental states? And the second problem is one that I'll call shared sense-making. And that has to do with how others affect the way that we perceive the world and act in the world. So others have an effect upon us. So we want to look at how that happens. When we talk about embodiment, I'll go through a number of issues. I'll start by talking about phenomenology, which is a kind of philosophy, and the relationship between phenomenology and science with respect to the body.
The phenomenology is like
I'll talk about extraneural processing, so processing that goes beyond the brain and is done by the body. I'll talk about posture and movement and how that has an effect on attention, memory, and generally cognitive performance. Physical fitness, that improves cognitive ability, exercising, and such like that. Perception is shaped also by motor capacities of the body, our motor system, our ability to move. So first, let me make a distinction that comes from the phenomenological perspective between two different senses of the body. And here, it depends upon understanding that we can approach the body from two different perspectives. The third-person perspective, which is the perspective of science and medicine, studies the body, you might say, objectively, using scientific methods. So phenomenologists refer to this as the objective body that is studied in that way. From a first-person perspective, however, one can study our experience of the body, how we experience our own body. So this is the phenomenological study of the body as experienced, and this is usually referred to as the lived body. So the objective body is one thing.
lived the kind of susu nyamnyong lule cheba chebe tadan de chochi de chilo na tadan chita the chik de susu lu koran lu chen kansa koran ge nyobe nyamnyong ko tone ni an lu ni zu toya da shidan chirwa the lived the to ko lu nyamsu nyongwaruchi.
In the philosophical tradition of phenomenology, these are often treated as separate, different ways to understand the body. But we can take an interdisciplinary approach and use both third-person and first-person approaches and see if we can make sense of how the body, in effect, helps to shape our experience. So things like nutritional status, if we're hungry or not hungry, respiratory and autonomic processes, hormonal levels,
the reflexes and the process,
emotional processes, postural and motor control processes. All of these things help to shape the way we experience the world. So, in contrast to a very long tradition in Western philosophy, a tradition that is characterized by dualism, which is sometimes referred to as the mind-body problem. It's the idea that the mind is something independent of the body. In contrast to that, contemporary theorists of embodiment, and for example, Francisco Varela was one of these, argue that experience and cognition depend upon the full body, not just the brain, and on factors associated with being in a physical and social environment. So the body in the environment, including, of course, the brain, is the full system that we need to look at. So,
independent dualism embodiment
okay. This idea of extra-neural processing.
So is Holiness right in thinking that from the dualist point of view, it's just the brain that does the job, the body has no role?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, dualist
well, of course, the dualist might say that the mind is what's important. Of course, you can have someone who focuses on the brain, and they are not necessarily a dualist. But there's a kind of dualism between just the brain and the whole body as well in some contemporary theory. So the design of the body imposes constraints on the nervous system and the way it works. So the body is going to be doing some of the processing for our experience. There's a kind of pre-processing. So if we think of sensation coming in, input into the brain, it turns out that the location and the status of sense organs will affect the information that's going to the brain. For example, the shape and location of our ears will determine direction of sound by amplifying or filtering inputs. So before it even gets to the brain, the body is doing some of the processing of the information. Post-processing, so if you think of it in terms of output, motor output, movement is not entirely determined at brain level. Right? It's re-engineered by the design of muscles and tendons.
Cuba.
Cuba? Oh.
No.
Their degree of flexibility, their geometrical relationships to other muscles and joints, and their prior history of activation. So the body is doing some of the processing for our ability to act in the world and for our ability to experience the world. Body posture, and so there's a number of scientific studies to show that if subjects turn their head and eyes to one side just prior to making a judgment, a perceptual judgment about something, the direction of their turning will influence the accuracy and the reaction times of the cognitive performance. When subjects listen to a sentence with head and eyes turned to the right, their performance in recall is better than when they listen with head turned toward the left.
No, his Holiness is really wondering if that's true.
It's true.
So maybe the person whom this was tested may have a problem with the left ear.
I think they probably had controls when they did the experiment. What this is tied to brain lateralization, the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and things like that. So.
There's generally a saying in the Tibetan or Indo-Tibetan among the practitioners that not at the public level, among the practitioners, that those who kind of naturally tend to lean their head more towards the left have a more compassionate kind of disposition and temperament. Those who tend to naturally lean their heads more to the right are more prone to kind of roughness and
I think even public level, I think those people who sort of might sort of proud, right?
Proud.
But particularly some scholars.
Oh yes.
Little beard. His Holiness was giving a historical example, but he said, don't mention him.
Top secret.
It was a Tibetan scholar, yeah.
I'll try to keep my head towards the left and towards Your Holiness. Other experiments have shown that eye movement and arm movements can interfere with spatial working memory. We've heard a lot.
Yes.
I think.
I'll tell the story.
In order to waste of time, I think I may tell the story. When I think not important. Yeah, okay, good. One time in Peking, at that time, among my entourage, one of the best scholar which helping me for study, one Mongolian, very nice person, genuine practitioner, top scholar. So one day he participated somewhere, and there another Amdo scholar, very famous, and also well known, quite too much proud. So then next So one occasion, I asked, well, what kind of a meeting and who are there? Then the Mongolian scholar told me, oh, Kishirora, there, and Okshutu Shishushasa.
So this philosophical assistant of His Holiness, who was a Mongolian scholar, he told His Holiness that there was Kishisharabla there with his, very straight goatee beard stuck high in the air, sticking out high in the air.
Yes.
Okay. So eye movement, arm movements can interfere with spatial working memory, where you are trying to remember a series of spatial locations. So the movement itself will interfere with that. Also, the development of perceptual and cognitive abilities is enhanced in correlation to greater amounts of crawling and mobility in infancy. So the more the infant crawls, the development of their perceptual and cognitive abilities are improved. And of course, taking different postures as you move through the world, walking as opposed to crawling, changes spatial perception and attentional focus. Here's a study by Adele Diamond, where she does it's a wonderful review of this kind of thing. And she says the close connection between movement, motor development, and cognitive development is reflected in the closely connected functioning of the cerebellum and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, areas of the brain that are responsible for both kinds of functions, areas of the brain that include motor function and also cognitive function. So we can see that the body, of course, works with the brain, and nothing, of course, will be possible without the brain, but certainly the body has something to add to this. Physical fitness and cognition. Physical exercise provides benefits to executive control, as was shown recently in a study by Hillman and colleagues. Fitness is associated with better, more accurate cognitive performance through increased cognitive control, resulting in greater allocation of attentional resources. And these are experiments done with 9-year-old children. And there are many other studies that indicate the benefits of consistent physical activity on cognition across a variety of tasks and populations. I believe we mentioned something about this in our other discussions. Francisco Varela coined the term inactive cognition or inactive perception. And it means that we are actively engaged in the world. Our motor processes shape perception. So Varela's term is that cognition is inactive. So the sensory motor capacities of the body shape our mental and cognitive processes. Because the body is always situated in the world, the demands and possibilities offered by various environments contribute to our experience. In terms of, for example, the hands that we have help to define a pragmatic working area around our body. And that has significance for movement and action, but also for attention, what we pay attention to, and for accomplishing tasks, of course. It turns out that the position of one's hands, where we're putting our hands around us, has an effect on visual attention. Objects located near one's hands receive more visual attention. Also, we don't perceive objects simply in terms of shape, size, and distance, but in pragmatic terms. As things I can use, I can pick up or I can't pick up, I can grasp or I can manipulate with my hands. So, as strictly visual, size and shape of an object may vary across distance. So if we see the hammer in a far distance, it looks small. If we see it here, it looks larger. Right? But pragmatically, in terms of what we can do with our hands, that remains invariant. The perceived object is either something I'm capable of picking up or it is not. If you remember, Anne Trisman gave an example of the clarinet, right? And the person who suffered some brain damage was not able to say what it was, but was able to make the gestures. I understand that when you were younger, Your Holiness, you found a telescope and put it up on the roof of the Potala and looked at the moon. Galileo, of course, was one of the first people to use a telescope to look at the planets. And an interesting thing about his drawings of Venus, if you look here, this on the left, the small black and white figure, is what he could see through his telescope. Below that, you see the drawings that he made. It turns out the drawing he made of Venus contains details that he wouldn't be able to register visually. So his hand somehow or other caught something that the eye did not catch. So the photograph...
Now, make kind of pola.
Yeah, I will.
Risha, His Holiness is just wondering, if he hasn't seen how he's writing and drawing them.
So I think the explanation is in terms of the two visual pathways. The ventral pathways is something that is conscious, that we recognize objects, when we see them. The dorsal pathway tends to be more unconscious, and it informs our motor system. So it tells our hands something more, perhaps, than what we can actually see and register.
Michel Doyo Debegi, Leve Chashir Lamka, Niores, Chik dorsal, Chik ventral. And it ventral the Kandangungus Toyadan, Devashuche, and the dorsal the Yanzo Chik Lugulia, Devashuchungores, the Chitical Chichinayanko, Kazakurang Shebalong to Majuvine, Chiputecune.
So the hands are getting more information than registers visually at the conscious level. So that may be an explanation of why he could draw more than he saw. Right. So the picture on the right is through a modern telescope, and if you can see the detail, there's this is something of a ragged edge, and this is what he's picking up here in the drawing, a kind of ragged edge, which doesn't seem to be visible in the original.
Telescope on the Migtonto Maris, remote sort can say sort of tigres.
But all of this is an attempt to say that sometimes the hands seem to get more information and are smarter, in a sense, than the eyes.
But couldn't there be a simple explanation that he, estimated that since the light is not going to be sharply cut, there's going to be some edges?
Yeah, it turns out, though, that the edges that he drew were accurate, according to the contemporary telescopes. So here's a summary of what I've said about embodiment. The body is responsible for extraneural processing. Posture and movement affect attention, memory, cognitive performance. Physical fitness improves cognitive ability, and perception is inactive. It is shaped by motor capacities of the body and the person's goals. In philosophy, contemporary philosophy, there is a thought experiment where philosophers talk about a brain being in a vat. The vat, which is a container full of liquids, chemicals to keep the brain alive. So this is a thought experiment.
Brain in a vat, lever and a kanda nucinalia.
And the claim by philosophers in this thought experiment is that everything we need for cognition is in the brain, so that if we stimulate the brain in the right way, we will have exactly the same experiences we have in our everyday life. So this argument is something that phenomenologists have argued against. They are saying, in fact, in order to sustain the brain the way it would have to be in order to deliver the experience that we have in everyday life, you would have to create an apparatus that was as complicated as the human body. And that without all of the details that come along with embodiment, this thought experiment wouldn't work. So the message is that the brain is in a body, and the body delivers information to the brain and receives information to the brain, so that these really constitute one system, and that all of this is located in the world, in an environment, and so there are inputs and outputs from the environment, and so the whole thing constitutes the cognitive system, and not just the brain. I'll move on now to intersubjectivity, right? The first issue having to do with social cognition, or how do we understand or make sense of other people. And the second one I'll come to will be, the second issue will be shared sense-making. How do our interactions with others shape the way that we perceive the world or attend to things? So I'll look at evidence from developmental psychology and neuroscience to speak about social cognition. How do we understand or make sense of other people? And this happens from the very beginning. This is a video of a 10-minute-old infant, very young, just after birth. And the father is holding the infant about 18 inches away and getting the infant's attention, and you can see what he's doing. This is a tongue protrusion. And you'll see what the infant will do in response. So this is referred to as...
10 minutes after birth.
This is a mouth opening, and the infant tries that. You can notice the tongue gets a little bit in the way. That's actually important because it's one of the reasons why we know it's not a reflex. In fact, the infant will improve with practice and will improve the gesture. So we know it's not a reflex kind of thing. There's a big debate about what exactly it is. It's referred to as neonate imitation or newborn imitation. So the idea is that we don't have to get into the big debate about what it is. All we need to see is that the infant comes ready to interact, is pulled into an interaction with others, responds to a face that it sees. So from the beginning, there's interaction. We start to make sense of others very early, not as other minds, but rather as agents, embodied agents with whom we can interact. So in philosophy, there's a lot of arguments about how do we read the other person's mind. And this mind reading, it's referred to, really, I think, is a very sophisticated and high-functioning kind of understanding of others. But much more basic to that is this kind of interaction. The neonate imitation is part of something called primary intersubjectivity. So Developmental psychologists refer to primary intersubjectivity, which starts just at birth and goes through, really through the rest of our lives. We have these abilities. They consist of sensory motor capacities that allow us to follow the eyes of other people, distinguish their intentional actions, perceive meaning in their gestures, facial expressions, movements, and actions, and also allows us to imitate and interact with them. So this is something that's there from the very beginning. And in the interaction, there's a back and forth relationship which is established that is temporally, in terms of timing, and also emotionally sensitive. And you can see there's a lot of studies to show this as a relationship that gets established between mother and child, the back and forth. And the idea is that interaction, something emerges from that interaction that is not reducible just to either one or the other individual. Meaning is created in the interaction itself. Part of the neuroscience that may underpin this kind of interaction has recently been discovered in mirror neurons. So there's a lot of talk about mirror neurons today.
Mirror neurons.
mirror neurons 간다 수년다 그래서 멜론다 그치. 간다 신기 줘발이야. 딜렌도 제게.
알레.
제베 갑대 아니 간다 멜론 소년알 소년 멜론을 잡아나지. 대들이야 mirror neurons.
So you can see here they're the same neurons in the premotor and parietal brain areas are activated when I act, if I reach to take a drink of water, or when I see someone else do that action. So I can make your mirror neurons all activated just by doing this. I don't know if you felt that, but your neurons are firing at that point. So when we see someone else act, our motor systems resonate with this action in preparation to respond to it in some way. Remember, we saw an image of the tightrope walker. Rupert had an image of the tightrope walker. In the beginning of the 20th century, a philosopher named Theodor Lipps had said something like this, that our motor system, when we look at the tightrope walker, our motor system reacts, and we're feeling it. We're feeling something, an embodied feeling of what it must be like to be up there. So that kind of resonance can now be explained scientifically in terms of these mirror neurons, or the mirror system. Our perceptions of the other person's movements, gestures, facial expressions, plus our own emotion-based interactions give us an embodied understanding of the other person. Here's an experiment that shows how the motor system is primed by seeing another person act. So motor-related areas of the brain, dorsal premotor cortex, inferior frontal gyrus, the inferior parietal cortex, the superior temporal sulcus, just areas that seem to be connected with movement, are activated when we see someone reach for an object. But also, if we simply see them look at an object, gaze at an object. So here, you see on the left, the man is reaching for the object, and these are the brain areas that are activated, the ones we've just mentioned. On the right side, the person is simply looking at the object, and a little bit less activation, but they're the same brain areas that are activated. So other people prime our system for action with objects. All right? And this leads to the second idea of shared sense-making. So I said intersubjectivity has two aspects: social cognition, how we understand other people, but also sense-making, how our attention to objects in the world around us changes when others are present, even if it is not explicitly guided by others. And I'll show you evidence from developmental psychology about shared attention and what is called social referencing, and I'll explain those things. And I'll also show you evidence from experimental psychology about shared object evaluation and something which is called the social Simon effect, and I'll explain that to you as well. There are a lot of studies of shared attention that starts around 9 months of age, usually. And developmental psychologists show us evidence that shared attention, by shared attention, we gain access to a meaningful world through our interactions with others. The other person's gaze, so they're looking, guides our attention. So when we see another person looking at something, we tend to look at that thing too. And then we check to see if they're still looking at that. And so we go back and forth in a kind of triadic relationship. But even at 8 months, infants follow the direction of the other person's look behind a barrier. If I'm looking at something that you cannot see, you'll still follow my gaze. And somehow or other, there's a realization that I'm seeing something that you're not. So the infant picks up that knowledge. So we learn to see things and to see them as significant in practices of shared attention. The idea of social referencing. Infants look to their caregivers, to their mothers, for example, or they simply confirm that the other person is present there when they're going to do something. And they look to them for guidance about how to act in ambiguous situations. So the emotional expression on the other person's face may show agreement or disagreement about the infant's actions. So the infant will check with its mother to see if it's okay to do this, if it's an uncertain type of thing. There's a certain point, a certain age where you might look at your mother and your mother frowns, but you go ahead and do it anyway. But that's part of development, I guess. Intersubjective object evaluation. Subjects presented with another person's face that is looking towards or away from an object evaluates the objects that are looked at as more valuable than those that do not receive much attention from others.
근데 kasi nya boyo na en michi gi khbe na lo chala da ma boyo na chala ka mi te ne delia shin da zo la mi ta e shu ma du yong ya da de ke che je ro chi ko rang xin yong de yo re sa.
And if there's an emotional expression on the face, you get a stronger effect. So if I'm looking with pleasure at some particular object, then you will tend to look at that object as having that value.
And this is all subconscious level.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't. Subconscious. Here, the Simon effect is very similar to Adele Diamond's discussion of hearts and flowers, the hearts and flowers experiment the other day. This was an experiment done by Simon, and the way it's set up is this. It's a traditional stimulus-response task. Participants respond to different colors, pressing a button with the left hand if they see the color blue, pressing with the right hand if they see the color red. So the colors are flashed in front of you, but they can be flashed on the right or the left. Right? They are asked to ignore, the subjects are asked to ignore the location of the color, which are this color is displayed to the right or the left. But it turns out that if there's an incongruence, there's a mismatch of the right versus the left between the color location and the hand used to respond. So if, for example, I have to press with the right hand for red, but the red is on the left visual field, then there's increased reaction times. It takes longer for me to push the button. So simply if it's on the opposite side to the hand I'm using to press the button, it takes longer for me to respond.
the experiment 제베걸이야 춘득하니체 마부터는 안에 라고 예매 the combatnemas 공부터는 라고 연박 combatnemas the instruction dite that the 춘득 때베걸이야 초가와 때마다 내가 맵지 근데 초 배는 마부 가도 마부때 초 예를 때는 그 라고 예번nem 고에서 그 교도스 다 가도 맨 마부때 바가시질 초유연 때문에나 내가 라번 마번 그래서 예번nem 고거봐 그 초면 좀 보이는데 대전에 there's 대배열is 그 reaction이야 to 고 그러지
Okay. When a subject is asked to respond to just one color with one hand, there is no conflict and there's no effect on reaction time. So if I tell you, press a button whenever you see red, it doesn't matter whether the red is on the left or the right, if you're pressing only one button and only for one color.
So what's the point of this?
Well, here's the point.
Okay.
When you have exactly the same task, I say to you, press when you see red. That's all you're doing. And if you're seated next to somebody else who is doing the same task except for the different color, each person responding to one color, each acting as if one of the fingers in the original Simon experiment, the reaction times increased on the incongruent trials. So simply the fact that someone else is sitting next to you will have an effect on your reaction times for this experiment. So the presence of the other person has some kind of effect on us. So here's a summary. With respect to embodiment, I pointed out that extraneural processing happens in the body, that posture, movement, physical fitness, inactive capabilities all have an effect upon experience and various aspects of cognition, including perception, attention, memory. And with respect to intersubjectivity, not only do I directly respond and interact with others, others have a significant effect on my perception and action. So I come now to my questions, which may be obvious, and you might have really very easy answers to them. So one question is, how important, this is about intersubjectivity and meditation then. How important is belonging to a community for meditation practices? How is meditation different when others are practicing it with you, when you're practicing together? Is there something like a shared meditation? And when you're learning to meditate, is it a learning that happens through imitation? Or is it by observation? Or by practicing together? Or by following instructions? Or something else? What is that learning process? In working with a teacher, how does shared attention to specific meditation practices become something other than shared attention? Does it get transformed into individual attention? And what kind of changes, what's lost or what's gained when this happens, when it ceases to be a shared attention? And with respect to embodiment and meditation, phenomenological analyses of normal movement and action suggests that in habitual and practiced bodily movement, one is not usually aware of what one is doing with their body. It happens sort of automatically almost. And when we become too aware of what our body is doing, that interferes with performance. So in sports, for example, in playing tennis, if we become too aware, if we pay too much attention to our body, then our performance in tennis gets worse. So the question about meditation is, does proficiency in meditation involve body consciousness? a focus, for example, on the body or bodily processes like breathing? Or does it involve an ability to move beyond awareness of the body? So how much am I aware of my body during meditation when I become an expert meditator? How is meditation different when one is in different body positions or postures? Is sitting meditation different from walking meditation? And is the difference directly tied to the particular posture or movement of the body? How does the external environment enhance meditation or mindfulness? Thank you.
You may want to go back to the first set of questions, because there was this whole series of questions now, and I would like to sort of come back to the first set of questions which have to do with intersubjectivity and meditation, which I think is a very important idea, that obviously the community plays an important role when you begin meditation or have a sense of a belonging. And so I'd like to address this question directly to you, Your Holiness.
No, to continue to kondo imai.
But that meditation the conscience, but Michi, Gabana, Devda, Ajitona, Devnibde, core atmosphere, the Manguji, Tavajumbo. So the designing out of the muni when the shooting talk catch what is shed out in the other one.
So this is definitely an important point. For example, for the monastics, whether you live as part of a monastic community or whether you live alone in a town, has a big different effect on the overall state of mind and well-being of this monk. And therefore, in the Buddhist tradition, there is an emphasis placed upon the need to have fellow kind of practitioners with whom you can share a certain sense of values and outlook. So friends, the technical term used is chutinju talk. How do you say that? Chudatimba. So the companions who share the same kind of outlook, view, and also behavior, conduct, so compatibility. Yeah. However, for much more advanced meditators, someone who's engaging in serious, intensive practitioners, then the recommendation is to really live as a hermit, like a wounded animal, sort of hiding somewhere.
Completely independence from that.
Yeah, total independence from the community.
Not a millimashor. Not a millimeter.
The expression is not giving the rope from your nose to someone else. So what do you call those things that you animals have? It's not really ring.
Nose ring.
Nose ring, yeah. Nose ring, yeah. So there's a rope that goes around it, normally for animals. So the expression is that you should, wrap it around your own neck.
So complete independence, not depend on other. Then you gain more strength.
So generally there is an expression in Tibetan where it says that there are situations where environment, because of its sanctity, blesses the practitioner, and also where situations where the practitioner kind of charges and blesses the environment. So there is a kind of a two-way interaction.
So that the end,
So of course this is a religious idea coming from the Buddhist religious.
The blessings are really
because the word blessing has that connotation.
So the under digi Mishenji 배는 꼼지버고 뭐네 직직 여기는 뒤인들이야 꼼대위는 배지 꼼도 상이야 용적으로.
So of course, so this is from the Buddhist religious perspective. It is said that if you are meditating, on a location where nearby there is a truly experienced meditator, then the quality of your own meditation will be better, and the progress will be better.
So one could say,
Sean, his Holiness has actually invited me to speak. It's often easy, I think, for us in the West, especially living in one can say a non-contemplative environment, to look upon meditation as almost meditation in a vat, isolated from everything else. So I don't want any of the theory and the religion and the institutions and the ritual. Just give me meditation all by itself. I just want the essence. So this disconnected notion of meditation, this is completely alien, I think, from every spiritual tradition in the world. And so in Buddhism, meditation, in authentic Buddhist practice, meditation is always embedded. It's embodied. And it's embodied, first of all, in ethics. And ethics is something we learn in social interaction. And we learn by emulation. We engage with, interact with people who are embodying ethics, even from early age. And then we learn to emulate it. We learn to emulate very early. And so in that regard, I think the community, interacting with the community, is absolutely essential. It's a foundation. And eventually, when you're mature enough, as His Holiness is saying, when you've really established foundation, then you can go off into complete solitude. But you're bringing it with you.
When
the mitusige and the France le pays 용시 comme 야도 한두 자도 배울기 왔어도. 그래 봐.
It says also that meditating in a place where great meditators have lived, if you are 1 month in that place, it's as much beneficial to be 1 year somewhere else. And it's also, of course, the blessing aspect, but also the inspiration. For instance, if you are in a cave or somewhere where a great practitioner has lived, sometimes there is the place where he stayed, where he cooked his tea, and everything is reminding you of the practice. It's a constant reminder and encouragement. And I noticed the difference. If you stay in a nice forest in Canada, the conditions are same in terms of seclusion, quietness, and so forth. But in the Himalayas, where everywhere there's something reminding you of great practitioners who spend years and years in strong endeavor, it has a very powerful source of inspiration.
Is when you go off to the cave and do it by yourself, is the meditation itself qualitatively different? Does it feel different in some way?
그래서
No, 단다가다 지 왼바 땡제. 다수수 지고 대대 집에 가는 검제배 걸이야. 나 검근 용어디. 야, 좀 뭐 임버지. 저 가가요나스.
나 공점은 용어.
Solon says that he has no experience of this.
Okay. There you go.
just to come back, there was one term mentioned, and I would like to sort of frame that. It's called blessings. I mean, that obviously is something that has to do with inspiration, but is there maybe another idea that for a scientist could give him a framing that what does that actually mean?
Blessings as a message. I don't know what is blessing. But often you see people come to because of that seek blessing. I always because of that responded from the Buddhist viewpoint, blessing must come within. From within. It is wrong to seek something in the name of blessing from other. Unscientific way.
It's unscientific.
From the Buddhist viewpoint.
But you said also...
So, but you say blessing, I don't know. I really. 아주 진럽스러워. 진럽. 배가 나올래 진럽 새끼들 니주사래. 시진. 그래서 진럽 진시로 시진. 럽시로 그랬다. 오케이. 자상가 그런 느버르지. 아니 누버 될 때는 랑니를 주어태야지. 상부 주어태야지.
The Tibetan word for blessing is chinlap, which is composed of two words. The first refers to some kind of force, or sometimes also referred to as sense of majesty. And the second word is lap, which has a connotation of transformation. So the idea here is that there is some kind of interaction which then results in a true transformation. So that seems to capture the idea better than just simply the word blessing. Maybe.
He's also said that it has to come from inside.
No. Transformation 소리나 영어로.
Because the transformation has to come from within.
But the environment can I think you said also the environment can bless.
해주문.
네, too. Definitely, yeah.
인상 가지고 pilgrimage 해야 되더라.
But that's also one of the main reasons why people do go on pilgrimage.
Yeah.
And that's the basic idea behind it, yeah.
There's a phenomenon of people who go up into space, astronauts and cosmonauts. And they go up, hard-nosed scientists and physicists and so forth. And because of what they experience, just in terms of the vastness of space and being able to see the planet from that perspective, just the spatial environment, they seem to have a spiritual experience. And they come back very enthusiastic about a kind of spirituality, which they pursue in their own way then. But this happens over and over and over again, so it's documented that this has happened quite frequently. So that would be an example of the environment the new environment they're in a sense, blessing them or calling forth a spirituality.
그래서 스피리추얼스라고 했나면 나 원래 차이너다. 원래 저는 스페이스는 안 되니. 근데 저번에 그 충충 돈데 걸어 봐.
네.
맞아도 이제 저번에 그 대주는 소소스베 튀기데 베트. 아차 그 저번에 슈슈슈 봐.
네.
나 이제 스페이스 안 되잖아. 찍고 베. 가서 봐. 맞아 봐. 로즈 난가들 양보선 쉐시도 와.
네.
로 양보쳐도 와. 뒤켜봐요.
His Holiness is wondering whether to characterize that change as spiritual may be right or wrong, maybe the correct or incorrect one. But one thing that is understandable is that normally when we are caught in our day-to-day life, living in the world, we tend to take things very seriously. We are stuck in a particular way of being, and whatever is in front of us, we take it to be real, really real. So there is this intensity and grasping. But when you have the experience of seeing the world from an outer space, it really creates a sense of proportion. Yes. And there is, in the Buddhist context, a notion of a mind as vast as space, expansive as space. So the person experiences that kind of vastness of perception and awareness. Then when seen from that perspective, since the world is just a tiny speck that you see, it really sets things and put things in perspective. So that is going to have definitely a radical shift in one's perception.
Yeah. 근데 이거 지금 그룹은 미지 소소배 상도 부수시고 더 되는 식이 야 미지 로 그냥 부영의 신도 계시하비는 소소 상도도 그냥 두고.
And also we can have, we can observe.
미카제베 두 개나 접대겠지. 다들 밀로 야부질이야 두 개도 접다. 이렇게 아따한테 깨어버렸을런데 핑도.
So we, even from ordinary day-to-day experience, we can see the effect of the presence of others very powerfully. For example, if someone is generally very kind of in a very anxious mood and has a disposition of always complaining about things and making big things out of small things, then if he happens to share a little moment with someone who is much more relaxed and has a kind of a more take it easy kind of attitude, then that interaction has the immediate effect of dampening the intensity of the anxiety of this individual. So you can see how others affect one's experience and perception.
I think the very reason why we consider education is important. That means
so to expand our understanding and awareness.
Rupert, you wanted to add something?
I was just thinking about this. I was wondering if, in a way, within the Buddhist tradition, there's a certain tension between, in the context of intersubjectivity and the influence of the outside environment, in the sense that the influence of the outside environment and our social interaction with people can be both good and bad. And there is a way in which Buddhism is trying to undo, Buddhist meditation practice is trying to undo some of the conditioning of intersubjectivity in order to kind of stand back and reassess that. So maybe this is why it is important sometimes to go off and be a hermit, to be away from that, so that you can reassess it. And I was just thought I'd also mention one thing. At one point in a very famous Theravadan Buddhist text, the Visuddhimagga, it says that when you get to the stage of, it would be something like the 9th or 10th stage of shamatha in the Tibetan tradition. When you get to that stage, you have to be extremely careful about what sort of company you keep, who you talk to. Also, you need to be very careful about where you live. The weather can affect you, and what you eat can affect you in all sorts of very subtle ways.
It's not only for meditation, too. I believe it's in the text, The 37 Practices of the Bodhisattvas by Gyaltsen Tomisambo, that it says when you're just starting out in practice, just beginning, go to a place, a foreign place, a place where you don't have all the social interactions, where nobody knows you, you're a complete foreigner, and then you start all over again. And if you really want to start over again, then you change your name, you change your haircut, you change your clothing, you adopt an entirely different way of life with an entirely different group of people. And you become a homeless one, kimbaba. And so you're really trying to, exactly as you're saying, in a way you're trying to wipe clean the slate of all your mundane conditioning and start afresh with a whole new set of ideals and way of life. And when you're well acculturated into that, into the Sangha, then as His Holiness said, once again, now that you are well acculturated, now you may go off into solitude.
Yes, please.
So, Your Holiness, this just brings up a conflict or a confusion in my mind of why this would be the way that we would want to train people. At the same time that it makes sense for the practitioner that as he, in this case, or she, hopefully, becomes more and more adept, may become more and more sensitive, and may actually need to leave the community in order to advance their own practice. But at the same time, the community may actually need the presence of that kind of person even more. So how do you reconcile these two views of the individual's path and the need of the others?
탐지기가 기주주의 남자들이 기주주 창진 예수전에 공견 주어다 학교에서 먹고 싶어서 두주도와 저거나 또 있대 계열에 이거 뒤를 단지 뜻을 못 앞에 뜻을 못 해버리 그다 식을 앞에 뜻을 못 찾도 이거 유로도 송도와 지금 현대적인 여러분이 지금 그걸 나랑 냠는 시야들 러 단지에 대해 용어인다 또
Of course, so here, of course, it's a matter of, again, this question of weighing the situation, pros and cons, and doing the most appropriate and right thing to do in a given situation. His Holiness was saying that this reminds him of the biography of the first Dalai Lama, Ginten Trub, who lived quite long, and at one point he spent quite a lot of time in solitude meditation in Nangchen, Changchen retreat. And he had very profound, deep spiritual realizations, including some visionary experiences and so on. But later, he moved down to Shigatse and started laying the foundations from Tashi Lumbu Monastery, which was a major enterprise, where he had to take personal charge of, deputing people to raise funds for the monastery, supervising the actual construction, and at the same time giving classes, academic classes to the young students and so on. He had to juggle many responsibilities together. And it seems that occasionally when there were some conflicts within the monastery, which he couldn't kind of, calm down, he would sometimes kind of tell the people that, look, if you are not going to listen to me, you have to remember I gave up my chance of being a single-pointed hermit practitioner, and I came down here to lay the foundation, help you for the community. You have to, be grateful for what you have done. So he sort of did all of this while being old and walking around with a stick.
Now here, again, maybe it's irrelevant, right?
Irrelevant,
irrelevant.
Not relevant.
Because I feel the promotion of moral, secular ethics through normal education way. Why? Unless the society, majority of the society, or generally, is a more compassionate society develop, then very difficult. You see, the person who come from a society where not much talking about compassion, value these things, just money, power. And I think ability to cheat other people, then maybe you see people praise, just because of able person, right?
No.
From such society, then leadership come. We cannot, it is unfair to blame those individual leaders who are doing something strange, because they themselves come from that society. Unless the society or family is in a more positive atmosphere and talking more about deeper value, then I think leadership come from that society will be different. So therefore, I think environment is, I think, very, very important. Here, I think some you see looks to see genuine practitioner when they are inside Tibet or in the monastery. And eventually seek to American dollar, go to the West, then completely changes that person. So it's the environment, you see, it really makes differences. I think our purpose is not produce one individual, so nice person. Our basic aim is how to bring, the awareness of importance of this inner value to the society. Not talking about religion, not talking about 가서다. 지난 여러분들은 그 지금 가가로서 와. 되게지 맞다. 지속으로 야우주가.
여러분 같아서.
아다 가서르거나 가서르. 여러분들은 아주 야우 잘했어. right. 저는 뉴스도 모럴 수도 있나? 어디 모럴 재미있나? 왜 야우 잘해 민문에다 왜 그쇼 왜 그랬어? 그 지소는 고기밖에 시스템에 있어.
So our ultimate aim should not be to really kind of bring spirituality or religion into the community, but our aim is to really find a way of bringing a basic transformation within the society, create a society where there's a deeper appreciation and discourse on these fundamental values such as compassion and so on, so that we can move away from the current status quo where people do pay lip service to moral ideas, say, so-and-so is a very ethical and moral person, but we leave it as an object of admiration, but somehow feel that it's not relevant in the real world. So we want ethics, secular ethics, to be made part and parcel of the real world, so that it has a real effect. So environment has a very, important effect. It becomes very important.
So I want to take this as a thought to take into the break, and maybe we come back with new ideas how to really engage secular ethics in our environment. So thank you for the break. The break was a bit longer than expected, so please come in.
Zambali.
Question?
I can, yeah.
Then we move over to, is that the second one you want to do that? Or basically
Yeah. I think so. Okay.
Can we please? Nothing yet. So Sean had a series of continued questions that have to do with intersubjectivity and the embodiment that he was presenting this morning. And so I would like to start with the question that you still have open.
Right. This is a question about working with a teacher of meditation. And it must start out as a process that involves shared attention, where you're both attending to some process together. But then in the end, when you do your meditation by yourself, there's some difference, something that is no longer shared, but something that becomes your individual attention. So is there anything that is added or subtracted, anything lost or gained when you shift away from this kind of shared attention with someone else to your own individual practice?
There might be some difference, but of course here we're assuming that the teacher is an experienced one. Of course, one factor here is that when you're in the presence of the teacher, you have a recourse to a person who might be able to help clarify certain things that come up in the process of your own understanding and practice.
DJ 다 기루도 컨디스치고 이미디 오모십제는 삽샤도 그냥 당고 로마스잖아요. 근데 랑게지스 근데 쇼지다 데 쿠바체고 하다 데 쇼지다 다시 쳐레스 아니 로메 컴다 매버 딤베타네 아니 똥켜고 하레스 또
So, in one of the very early Buddhist texts, 400 stanzas on the Middle Way, which is a 2nd century text, there is quite a wonderful passage that describes the responsibility or the skillfulness of the teacher. And it says that one needs to have a very appropriate attitude towards the student, because the student is someone who has come there to seek learning or knowledge. And also, on the part of the teacher, there needs to be a very good understanding of the mental state and the inclination of the student, so that whatever is taught can be taught in a way that is most suited and beneficial to the student. And so in this way, one should be able to, in some sense, nurture the student in the most effective manner.
So there's something like, I think the whole future of the student depend on you. So you have heavy responsibility. And you must give teaching out of that kind of sense of responsibility and full affection like that.
When you have a high-level teacher, what is it precisely that's most important to share with the student?
기겐 세토부지나스 아니 다른 바로 간저지네 아니 그도냐 뭐 셰치고 나스다
셰치고
나오 로 작업을 저리자고 가르치기는 근데 그런 거 영어를 쓰던데
아이로
곰냐 보자봐
자 더벼서 시합이는다 자 더벼서 시합 주시를 무시 고구마 줘라 주시 고구마 뭐 주시 고구마 이거리 안다 저주 고구마디 주시 미로 말이야 아니 님이 지금 디삼이부터 티삼이부터 신호시도 돼 아니 이거 또마도 직접 전화하면라 또 주셔까지 나요스래 공도 나요스래 근데 무시할 수가 없거든 아무 녀석이 죽었어 주시 고구마들다 녀석이 그래서 녀석다가 출발을 했어 식사 가게 맞다 뒤지고 순신이 자셨어 저주 공매 다 나온디 믿음 뒤탐절로 리뷰 잘을 샤워 임지 들을 못 쳐도
So there's talking about, an advanced teacher being sensitive to at what point what needs to be shared with the student. There's a story of the previous Tushi Rinpoche, who was the teacher of Zatu Rinpoche. And so one day all the preparations have been made to receive a major ceremony, empowerment, and all the rituals facilities have been created, including the ritual cakes and so on. And so when the actual rite of initiation was supposed to take place, the teacher went to bed. He just fell, he slept. And then the student was waiting, and then finally the teacher got up and said that all of this is just an illusion. All of this is just an illusion. That was the only thing he said, and he didn't give the empowerment. So it is at that point that Rinpoche was actually received this direct introduction to the nature of mind.
And so some kind of deeper understanding about the big gap appearance in reality. To share that.
Yes, David, you have that.
David, yes,
The body is expressing the mind. Your Holiness, I have two related questions. The first question would be, when an advanced student is interacting with an adept teacher, at some point the advanced student will have the chance of experiencing extremely, how to put this, ineffable, which means you can't describe them in words, mental states that are very important. And the question would be, how can the teacher, by observing the student's bodily states, know that the student has in fact experienced these advanced states of consciousness? That's question one. The second question is a more general version of the first question, and that would be, in Buddhist psychology, what is said about how the body may affect various mental factors. So those questions are actually related to each other, the one being, the second being an extension of the first.
당고리 가서 영어로
당부들이 당부디 배나 다 라마세도 버지 다 종교나
가리구나.
종교나
종교나.
나 남시 찔이야 로메고네 야지 검그 영화체 도부터 레그바 근데 되게 간다 도베리가시 나 지마치시면 간 랍도 말아 줘도면 줘도면부터 그 용그레스 다 생기 오던데 냠용 근데 베컵려야 다 칸에 라베 맨자 나는 주에 맨자는 라메 지금 콜롱하고 남주한테 되게 돈에 그 체르부 가발레만에다 냠용무시 턴 오늘 턴마도 되게 되네 간데스타지 지금 그랬어 단 라메 갱고나 될 저 직체 대원이부터 남배 뭐보다 제마도 되게 돈에 셰베 남샤 센터스 좀 남샤 셰베 걸
류즈로
류고 돈에 야 심중 다들 개발 요마요 걸 대셰요나스 더 류고 제베 돈에 아니 로브 죽다 With respect to the first question, I have nothing to say. There's not much I can say.
뭐시한데 류마가 참말 때네 아니 가서 신규 봐야지 규주 그래 시소로 이른서 다를 수 있습니다. 근데 집에도 다디
In general, there is understanding in the Buddhist tradition where on the basis of external behavioral signs, whether verbal or physical and emotional expressions and so on. So generally there is an understanding in the Buddhist tradition that there could be behavioral signs, whether verbal and physical, and also emotional expressions and so on.
The spice not did that. Intelligence not did. Lamalo Susudo. Because you can't kill your the London Junior part of that, said he. So the understand that would actually this sort of stuff. What did he?
So there is an understanding that on the basis of external behavioral science, one can infer to some degree the mental qualities of an individual, other person. So for example, there is in the text the suggestion that by looking at the way in which an individual responds in the face of suffering, whether tears flow to his eyes, and how whether the hairs of the bodily paw stand up, and so on, and not just once or twice, but over a certain period of time, one can infer the presence or absence of compassion in that person. So similarly, there are, for example, in one of the texts, a discussion of 44 different kinds of internal signs which correlates in the external behavioral signs as well, which are indicative of different levels of realization on the path of preparation, path of seeing, and path of meditation, and so on. So these are explicit signs, both internal and their correlates in the external behavioral. Similarly, in Vinaya, a monastic discipline text, since in the Buddhist context, the relationship between the teacher and the disciple is so important, it becomes very important on the part of the student to really examine whoever he or she wishes to take on as a teacher, to really examine whether this person is qualified to be your teacher. So there's an expression that we should not act in this matter, which has so much important significance, kind of hastily, like as if a dog was confronted with the presence of kind of bodily parts, just like lungs. The dog will immediately go and jump and eat it. So one should not behave in that manner, but rather one should apply a sustained attention and inquiry. And in some sense, it says that the word spying is used. You have to spy upon your teacher to see whether that's quality. And there's a beautiful verse in this monastic discipline text written by Tsonawa, which is about 13th century, 14th.
도루. 아. 맞다. 소리야. 가서.
소리 추르기
어디?
냐 추난네베 냐나
천원네베 냐는 럭하자. 추일럭 요원 남기 때 세치게지. 그래서 너도 가래. 롱디.
도라이 러스
너 매나. 근데 미션.
So there is, in fact, in this text, a citation where it says that although the fish in the lake may be not visible, they're hiding, but when there is a wave in the lake, it reveals the location of the fish. So in the same manner, although the qualities of the teacher may be hidden, but the way in which the teacher behaves, you can infer the qualities of that master. So there is that general understanding that on the basis of external behavioral kind of science, one can infer qualities. So this suggests that you have to really annoy your teacher, you have to pester.
Then judge response.
And then judge how that person responds to your pestering, that annoying.
이게 맞다. 클럽을 비슷해야 되지. 리고라 가지비지. 그것도 스타일다. 저 가져왔어요. 뭐 서버 공부했어요. 언제 와서 왔어? 그때 와서었어요. 그때 그 서버 공부에 비지 거기에 거서 서버 공부 뒤도 서버 공부로. 제가 라마리에 거다. 애들 라마 그때 집에 잠짓더니 이미디 시그래.
So Kunu Lama Rinpoche once told his students a story. There was a person who was meditating,
while he gave me oral transmission of
Shantideva's text. So he told the story that once there was a person who was sitting in a meditation, in meditation at one of the religious, kora, a kind of circumambulation site. And another person walked by and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm meditating." And asked,
meditating on patience.
He said, "I'm meditating on forbearance, kyanti, sometimes translated as patience." And so this person said a rather rude word, which basically is the Tibetan equivalent to "go to hell." But it's the Tibetan equivalent of "go to hell."
Oh, you can translate that very literally in English.
Oh, really? Yeah, it means eat shit,
There we go.
It's forcing me to say this word here. And then, and without blinking, without hesitation, the meditator shouted back, "You go to hell, or you eat shit." So clearly he wasn't actually doing any practice.
So similarly, if the practitioner is someone who's cultivating compassion and bodhicitta, then if you annoy them and really pester them, then you can see your teacher. Then you can see how the teacher reacts.
I think more serious. I think your question. That is temporary. Don't have to share your money. As a lose not the shame do. In another than share the zane, rugby, lose him. Shame is in the easy put start joy. That dinner, Taro Chimba Kadula, Benanga, Sedu Negoki, 7 Negoki, but sem the lung some disutedi, or Rawa Humble shows joy, Benokong to tend to shoot it. That the Milam Negolia, Yatos, Yankoraji, independence research. That they are Sheba Kazik Tata, certainly in the Zane, Ragbesh, Lungsum Shane, Zane, Pumbu to shoot joy.
So, in response to your second question, David, it's an important question, and if you look at the standard or mainstream Buddhist text on whether it's Abhidhamma or Pramana, epistemological works, since these sources belong to the Sutrayana framework, there is less discussion of the role of, because these texts do not actually talk about the different levels of subtlety of consciousness like the Vajrayana text. So then there is less discussion of the role of body in the perceptual and cognitive processes. But if you look at the Vajrayana texts, and from that perspective, since a distinction is drawn between various levels of subtlety of consciousness, coarse level of everyday experience and subtler levels of experience and very subtle levels of experience, then at the coarse level of everyday experience, then it speaks about the interaction between subtle energies and subtle consciousness. And So the grosser the level of the consciousness, the more contingent and dependent it is upon physical processes. So of course, the role of the body becomes very important. And comparatively, so for example, compared to the waking state, if you're in a dream state, the state of consciousness in a dream is comparatively more independent from the body because it is subtler. Whereas in the waking state, much of our everyday experience...
That independence is the way we mentioned that.
Comparatively.
Oh, comparatively.
Comparatively, yeah.
Something like, I think, more autonomy.
Yeah, more autonomous.
But that's a shadow. But the Zangol said, she did it, maybe said, Lulia, that Lunig, you are the Dane, that losing the other, you want to that.
For example, there are practices in the Vajrayana context whereby you focus your attention and visualize certain things at a specific points of your body, such as the networks where many channels come together, like the chakras. Then there is a real physiological effect. So these practices are there.
Fuel, because the physiological effect.
So in fact, it is through manipulating the physiological processes that in the practice, the movement of the coarser levels of prana or vayu, the wind, and consciousness.
I think it is very, very clear. The grosser level of mind, so long these grosser level of mind remain active, then the deeper level of the mind will not be active.
Manifest.
Manifest.
No.
So now the method to reduce the activities of grosser level of mind, not through mental meditation, but you see the physical exercise. So this is very clear.
I mean, yogic exercise.
Yogic exercise.
And so if one wishes to study this further,
the place to go is the Vajrayana texts, because they focus more on the body-mind and mind-body interactions than does the Sutrayana.
No, that's true.
Since there is a little bit of unclarity where that boundary is between coarse and subtle, it seems that dreams, in a way, are an indication of getting more into the subtle.
That's right.
Could you explain a little bit more where that is? That
boundary?
No. Because dreams also get signals from the auditory, for instance. You can integrate that into your dream.
I don't know.
Okay.
It's not helpful if, what I have to say is not very clear in my own mind.
Adele, please.
I care very deeply about the practical implications of what we are saying here for the development and education of children. And I'd like to say a little bit about that. Sean talked about intersubjectivity and how even the newborn baby is ready to interact with the caregiver, and how important the dance is between the baby and the caregiver. Caregiver baby. Babies who are born prematurely differ in two important ways that make that dance difficult. And if parents can just be told what this difference is, it's very easy to make the correction. One thing is that they're much slower to react. So you do something to the baby and you expect the baby to react, and you don't get anything because the time frame you're waiting for is too short for that premature baby. Also, especially for men, we like to be active with the babies, but premature babies are very easily overstimulated. So what would be wonderful for a full-term baby is too much for the preemie. So the preemie cries, and you think, oh, I'm such a terrible caregiver. I think the baby's going to respond to me. I get no response. I think I'm going to make the baby happy. He cries. I'm no good at this parenting. And all you have to do is give a little less stimulation and be a little slower. And then the dance starts. And once the dance starts, the parent's enjoying it. And the parent thinks, I can be a good parent. And you can get it on the right track. So just with a little bit of knowledge, you can help the parent work with the preemie and get the dance started on the right track instead of on the wrong track. With very premature babies, at least in the West, we tend to separate them from their parents and put them in incubators because we think they need to be in machines. But they're showing now that what the baby needs most is to be next to the mother. And they can get the air. So they're moving too slowly to get rid of the incubators and leave them with the mother. The last thing I wanted to say is that today and yesterday you said two things that were very profound. And I would like to emphasize their implications for education. Too often, we educate teachers to do specific things. We give them exercises to do or lessons to do, or this is the way you teach something. And you said the teacher has to be sensitive to where the student is. So it's not that the same procedure is right for everybody. It's the dance between the teacher and the student. You need to be sensitive to what the student needs and where the student is. And the other thing you said is that it depends on where it's coming from. My mother was very uneducated, but she was very wise. And when people would ask her for advice about parenting, she would never give them specific advice. She said to love your child. If it's coming from the right place, even if it seems like the wrong thing, it will be fine. And if you do what should be the right thing, but it comes from the wrong place, it won't be. And teachers need to hear that it's not that it's so important to have the manual of this is what you do. It's the interaction and the reading and the active thinking. And I just wanted that people should hear that. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Okay. So, please have Okay, come to the survey.
So, Your Holiness, I wanted to follow up with that because yesterday you mentioned something that I thought was very interesting about the role of women in leadership and compassion and as the role of women in reducing suffering and being more compassionate. And as a mom of two small children, I know that one of the ways in which I'm able to be compassionate is by having shared attention with my children. So I'm wondering what you think about the role, sort of a prediction. If we had people that are expert meditators with compassion meditation, do you think their shared attention should be better? And on the flip side, is cultivating shared attention important for the development of compassion? What do you mean by shared attention? Actually, I wanted to ask Sean to elaborate a little bit. It's something he mentioned in his presentation today. Do you want to say a few more words about that?
About shared attention? Yeah. Well, shared attention is something that happens naturally in the development of the child. The child starts to look to the other person and see how they interact with objects in the world. So at first it's about catching the other person's eye, seeing where they're looking, and then having them look at you. If I want to call your attention to some object, I'll look at you and then I'll look at the object, and then back at you, and you will start to look there. So it's a three-way thing. It's me, you, and the object. And then we direct our attention together at the object. So basically that's shared attention. But it ties into the development of the child, because the child now starts to see that things in the world will have significance for others, and they'll start to notice how they interact with those objects, and they'll learn about what the meaning of the object is or what the value of the object is. So all of that comes into play at around 9 months to 12 months of age.
But it actually continues. It continues not only to objects in the world, but how we treat other people as well. So it is part of the developmental process of learning what's important, what's not, how to behave.
양 수술 소dü야 파 소dü제 대체적으로 받아 dü제 자체 다들 닝지 제도 되는 고민이 돌이야 뒤뇌바 숙제를 필요해 배지게 나스 직체 아니야 뒤뇌바 고란 제도 제베나 닝지 깨야야 양 숙제로 되게 나스 so
숙제는 매우미
yes yeah his holiness would I mean he would expect yes in both directions, particularly for people who are cultivating compassion would have greater ability to sustain this shared attention. Yeah.
tonjung sharap ndawado. tonjung jobali jungwe sharap. Lama dan loba niga jung jiba tene ene go de che ti. Yang shared attention sharak na ka jamodo.
그러죠.
Just the very foundation of developing understanding in the Buddhist tradition starts with the understanding arising from hearing. And so they don't say just pick up a book and start studying. But the foundation for learning is hearing, where very, very commonly there's a text, and the teacher is attending to the text, the students are attending to the text, the teacher then gives explanation, there may be some discussion, but it's all a shared attention, and it's coming directly from the teacher to you, and together with the text. And so that's the foundation of it. It is shared attention. On the basis of that, then you develop another level of understanding, insight, wisdom, based upon your own reflections, your own critical reflection. That can be in solitude, but it can also be on the debating courtyard, where again it's shared attention. And they're doing this for up to 8 hours a day in the great monastic universities. And finally, the insight, understanding arising from meditation. But shared attention, very important for both the hearing and the thinking.
뭐 먹기도 좋을래 여러지 졸린 시간 거치 왔다.
두두.
그래서 야 정말 저 열이.
가사데라. 가서 중앙 딱 말해. 지지 리우메인트 드리죠. 나 얘도 졸린 제르셔도.
자자자 뭐 사물로 챙기면 뭐다. 시시가 아니다. 딱 졸린 시간 간다. 가서 우리 그게 렉길래야지. 로스울네 왔다. 렉길래야.
So as Alan pointed out, he was saying that this discourse, sharing of discourse and participating in a group kind of debate is a very integral part of the Buddhist education system. In fact, there is a 4th century text by Asanga called Abhidhamma Samuccaya. Actually, this text keep coming back. It's one of the Abhidhamma texts, compendium of Abhidhamma, where he has a specific chapter on the whole question of conducting of a discourse, where he talks about how in the process of exchange back and forth, new insights emerge through this interaction and process. So this kind of discussion seems to be a very important part of the learning process. So, for example, even in the case of Buddhist instructions, it's not enough for the teacher to just give one instruction and just leave it there. On the part of the students, there needs to be a lot of discussion that is important. So also on the part of the students, if that Lama teacher tells them right from the beginning that, once I've given the lecture, there will be a discussion period. And then the students are likely to be much more vigilant and stay attentive Whereas if it's only one-way monologue instruction, then the students may even take the opportunity to take a nap during the lecture.
Liz, you had a question?
So this is related to the topic of intersubjectivity. In social psychology, there's a long history of research showing the power of others on our own thoughts and behaviors. And this leads to conformity and compliance, and that can have both good consequences and bad consequences, such as in war, such as Abu Ghraib in the Iraq War. It was often thought to be due to the power of the social group. And so I'm just wondering how a meditative practice might alter the power of social others on our own actions and thoughts.
지다마시 social science 나오는데 제가 뭐 제어해서 간다 미션다 지도냐 뭐 대비 경기 수수 샤줄이야 슈는데 들려다 곰 잡지 로장배 경기 대중은 원도 만들어야 답시로 가려나스
곰좀 신이 와도 만들어야
슈는 미션다가 슈는
슈는
만들어야
곰 주고 백마로 다 뒤쳐도 남지기 싫어
그래
소소랑도 가도 랭이 집에 남주야나 다 뒤까지 살아
그래 So it's not just a question of meditation. The one very important factor is the application of your own critical faculty to be able to really distinguish what's right and what's wrong.
But 실시도 전에 쉽게 변하리야. 순네 로된 되냐와 전에 소르네 지고게 들어가 말아. 로도 담바고도 와.
So even in the context of Buddhist instruction, there's a 2nd century text where it says that you need 3 qualities on the part of the student. One is objective, being objective and open, and that is not enough, but you need intelligence, critical intelligence.
아들 젊으신 어르신은 말이야. 강다 총수의 민배 멋집싱스. 랭니 집에 로이 투다.
So Tsongkhapa, for example, writes at the beginning of his in the opening section of his great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, he says that it's aimed to those people whose mind is not clouded by biases and prejudices, darkness of prejudices, but also is endowed with the faculty of critical intelligence, able to judge what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And then, the 3rd quality is having an interest. So these are the 3 qualities of a good student: open and objective, with a critical faculty, and being interested.
세상가 거사 안데디 로스 주선다. 딘데가 그러지. 순네 로덴 세아기 대셔 교인들자네 렉션 니셰 제시마스. 지자 뭐실라메 소르디 이네 다 나오초 연구로다. 다들 나오초베도 나오초베 시험시고 거라. 살라메 지송도 있게지면 뭐지. 그래도 인도 디 렉션 니셰 제시마스.
So in the context of a teacher-student relationship, the 2nd quality, which is the critical faculty of intelligence, in the commentary, when it's unpacked, it says someone should be able to distinguish between what is a good explanation on the part of the teacher and what is not a good explanation on the part of the teacher, so that it's not you just take everything that the teacher says at face value. So there's a story here, another story.
Any gigantic man loved us and a kiruti, can't love the Ningorda. So that gigantic that the Leshan Jigi, Tajatalia, Nemadi, Matrix level. Love this issue about the
So there was a teacher had a student who was very obedient and would basically, listen to him all the time. But one day the teacher wondered whether this student has any critical faculty of his own. So one day to test this, the teacher told the student, you should take the butter and leave it outside in the sun. So he took the butter obediently and left it outside in the sun. So of course, so although he was very obedient and listened to what the teachers instructed him, but of course, this leads to a wrong thing here.
디 기름 나는지 요래 참수 그지 고确实 자 기계 몇 쪽사 차송스 다 그냥 공부가 교수라래 자 아니 좀 전에 다 고지되기 아니 말아 뭐지 신다 심다 한때 좀 고지되기 아 저랑 먹으면 근데 고모고 있어도 그래나 저도 기계인데 왔다 켜라 양타버려서 뭐는 렉션이신 지기도 봤어
There's also a story from the Buddha's
story.
Now Buddha's tales of his past lives, Jataka. And there's a story of a Brahmin who had many students. And one day the Brahmin, he was quite poor. So one day the Brahmin gave an instruction to all the students in order to test their level of critical faculty, and told them that, I'm very poor and we are struggling, and you should all go and steal something from others so that we can have more resources. And everybody went, except for one young student who was one of the Buddha's previous lives. And he said, teacher, you have given this instruction, but stealing is wrong. I should not, this should not be done. And then at that point, the master said, he's this, this good student.
So
the application of this critical faculty is very important.
So we were talking this morning also about another topic, which was the embodiment. And I would like to ask Sean to quickly use the next 50 minutes to start a discussion about the embodiment.
Yes, one of the questions I had was the role of body consciousness, how much attention we ought to pay to our body. And in the case of meditation, I know sometimes one starts out by paying attention to breathing. But is there a point in meditation where one transcends that body consciousness, or is that body consciousness constantly there?
그냥 전반적인 시스템 류 전반적 소화전반자 심점적 최전반자는 쉐디거리 차차차도 되겠지. 얘는 란네 안에 진행이 심지시부터 주미 거절고 슈걸 항동간다 로로다.
네.
저도 들어다. 다음에도 슈간도 돼. 그 접수서도 돼.
So in the context of Buddhist meditation, of course, although we begin with, focusing on the breath and bodily processes, so for example, in the standard, one of the most standard Buddhist meditation practices is known as the application of the four mindfulnesses: mindfulness on body, feelings, mind, and contents of the mind, or mental objects. So here you can see that although we begin from body awareness and paying attention to the bodily processes, but then gradually moves on to ever more subtler objects. So you can see that there is a kind of a progression there. Similarly, one of the main reasons why in the Buddhist context,
미국 참여관으로 샤모도 제. 자, 지내 있는 자네냐. 다 미국 즉 발만 없이도 왔다고. 봐. 양직 저들이 이르자네 운동 다 때야. 다 되게 남도 뭔부 춤도 시대야. 다 진짜 유행이지. 남도고 처음 유행이지. 다 내급식 탑시 디마도 매번 인상 디셔버 마도. 시 류트만 상 엄마 시 이르자네 류미상. 다 디가 쪽셔 거. 자, 다 되게 류를 차고 도고. 디념을 시작한다. 다는 소화 전문 시작. 소화 대화를 천자 딕도고. 저상은 디디기 그 곰개베 거든디 퍼조기 치즈로로 세야 된다를 시작도. 아, 너 운동 저거디 운동 공공 거빈 그래.
남도시.
남도 초대 대삼식 거를 거 디레마도 디 등진 내야 서로 그래도 상원집으로 내서 가게 봐.
In fact, if you look at the whole, meditation practice in the Buddhist context, taking breath as the object focus of one's meditation is only one part of it. And in fact, one could say that it's an expedient.
Not only Buddhist, I think according to Indian tradition.
Indian tradition, classical Indian tradition. In fact, in a sense, it's a kind of a skillful, expedient approach, because the breathing process is somewhere in between. It's not that coarse, kind of a solid object, but at the same time, it's not very subtle. So, and this is something that we do. So, by taking breath as the object of your meditation, in a sense, it's providing you kind of a more convenient way of sustaining your attention and applying your attention. But if you look at the actual Buddhist textual description of the mindfulness of body, then the main focus is really on reflecting upon how body is composed, the substances that make up the body and impurities of these and so on, so that the aim here is to assist the practitioner to be released from too much grasping and attachment to body. Similarly, in sensations, next level is the mindfulness meditation on feeling, where again the aim here is to assist the practitioner to move away from strong attachment and grasping at pleasurable and joyful sensations. So in many of these practices, the aim is to assist the practitioner to overcome certain forms of habitual distortions that happen in one's mind. So it's not, for example, like mindfulness of breathing is thought to be very helpful for individuals who have a tendency to be very distracted. So many internal chatter coming up all the time. For these individuals, then taking breath as the object of meditation is thought to be very helpful. And then to finish the translation earlier, Solana said that, in fact, in the Buddhist context, the main reason why cultivation of single-pointedness of mind is so emphasized is to have some kind of facility that you can then later apply in cultivation, perfecting and developing your own insight, so that eventually you will be able to use a sustained attention to gain insight into the very nature of your own self, anatma, no self, and where this is the vipassana, the insight.
Would you like to add something to that?
Is it the case that when you are moving through towards the more subtle objects, that you always start with the body, or can you push that aside and go directly to the more subtle form?
Yeah, it is conceivable that you can jump onto a subtle object. Yeah.
And the awareness of the body, is it to focus on your breathing is one thing, but is there something like a global awareness of the body, a kind of overall experience of the body that is important, rather than focusing on one thing?
Overall body awareness.
I don't know. I'm just okay.
Maybe this is where you might want to add Tibetan medical science.
About full body awareness, I don't know any references.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, maybe from...
I think in the standard list of the various types of body mindfulness within the Satipatthana Sutta, in fact, there is seeing all the different elements in the body. There is being aware of all the different movements of the body when you are walking, sitting, lying down, when you move a limb, change a limb. So there is something like that. Just to add a slight perspective on it, I remember once I had meditation teacher who, this relates to the point, Sean's point about your attention going to where your hand's going or something like that. And he gave me a task to do and said, with my hands, and then said, but while you're doing it, you must be aware of your feet at the same time, which also perhaps relates to this kind of counteracting sometimes the natural tendencies of our attention to try and give a broader attention.
Mathieu?
Yeah, also we must not forget that in all the teachings, whenever there is something connected with the body or the speech, it's always mentioned that it is eventually to transform the mind. A proper body posture, sort of a straight sort of channels, and then the mind will be also straight and balanced. And mantra means what protects the mind from confusion, from distraction. And so ultimately the mind is like the king and the body and the speech like the servants. So they are just like, preliminaries, but any exercise, physical exercise or speech exercise is meant to transform the mind, which is the goal of the Bodhisattva.
David?
Your Holiness, a number of us here in the scientific community have discovered that best performance and best mental control arises from mixing a variety of different kinds of practices in what we would call cross-training, across practices, sometimes emphasizing this one, sometimes that one, varying the importance or priority given to one practice or another over time. And the question would be that in the context of the body, can you imagine, might you have some comments about practicing in which you switch back and forth between focus on breath, mindfulness of body, and the other forms of the four mindfulnesses, combined with use of tantric practices where you do the equivalent of Kundalini yoga or other kinds of, I forget the Tibetan form, highest yoga tantra practices along with the four mindfulnesses and the breathing, mixing them in various ways to create a better stew of practices.
지난 고난주 세례돈 제바체를 걸려야 다 간다 로장에 그 리듬 망부지 지난절 제도 지게 되벌레 담에다 망부시냐 모두 제베나 누베체를 부지 구주다 두스 디엔자다다 대만야샤 소라다 우르미 번데 디냐냐 마고 버지야 디네레 베네레 대만자 참마 곰야 진마게 슈네 셰베 지 미게 두물미야다 데 데르단지 제베나 누베체를 주고요나스
There's
a Tibetan expression which says 100 things or bits from here and bits from there, but nothing complete. So
not our things. None of your things.
His Holiness says that often he describes himself as one of those kinds. A bit from here and a bit from there.
It seems to have worked quite well.
Of course, this is, I think, not appropriate. But our sense, you see, I think, very serious. So, my own sort of daily practice is concerned now. Of course, from early, I think every day, I think at least 5 hours spent on some meditation.
Formal sitting.
So now within the meditation, the much portion, analytical meditation, impermanence, and then my emphasis is the ultimate reality. Start, what is I? What is self? You can't find. Obvious. Then through that way, all phenomena of Buddha, our ultimate cause, teacher. If we investigate what is Buddha? You can't find. But that sort of absence of kasora, I mean, why we cannot find? The very way our investigation is not content.
Yeah, so the fact that when we search, when we kind of follow after our terms and search for some kind of reference to our terms, we are moving beyond the framework of everyday convention, that we are not, we are not contented by the boundaries of everyday convention.
So the fact is just dependent, no absolute. Without sort of content, the relative, try to know the ultimate sort of absolute, you can't find, because there's no absolute. So that's the way, the non-self theory or absence of independent existence. That's one of my favorite sort of practice. And also that's the basis of the deity yoga, visualization of oneself as a deity. Without that practice, they visualize oneself as a deity is foolish, meaningless, right? Stupid. So first, you must develop the basis of these practice. So that's the understanding of the emptiness, or something like space. One space there, then you can build something. So that's one of my main sort of the practice for meditation. So I think in 5 hours, not continuously, I can't. My mind always goes, yeah. But you see, each sort of certain sort of visualization, remember about that. So several times just meditate on that. And then motivation, compassionate motivation. As soon as wake up 3:30 or around 3, as soon as wake up, I recite one sort of salutation to Buddha by Nagarjuna. It's wonderful. So they come to Delhi.
So then, this is the form of taking refuge in the Buddha. Yeah.
And then the very purpose of taking refuge Buddha is it serving for other. Your life, your very existence should be something meaningful. Just take oneself. Animals also do that. Nothing special. We have such wonderful intelligence. We must utilize this intelligence maximum way. So thinking more about well-being of other, your well-being automatically comes. Think oneself well-being, even one's own well-being will not achieve. Too much anxiety, too much worry. No use. Think more about this entire sentient being's well-being. It's immense sort of benefit. Of course, still mind experience is very, very small, just a beginner. Even then, immense benefit. So, combination. The wisdom or understanding of ultimate reality, in a way, nothingness or zero create basis of 10, 100,000, 100,000 like that. So without a zero, you can't just build that way, isn't it? So that's Buddhist way. I'm Buddhist, so I practice that way. And then meantime, the impermanence also is to come. The mindfulness,
mindfulness of body, all of these come together.
Like that. But so far, Solo parmonyo.
So up to now, he's always saying, up to now, fortunately, as a result of meditating on impermanence, it didn't lead to the psychological problems this monk had.
Yesterday I mentioned, you see.
That's translation. Thus far, no nervous breakdown.
So, and also, you see, the thinking about the suffering, or third level of suffering of other. That to me is most effective. Just to see seeing others suffering, first level, not even animal. One of their own companion is to suffer. The rest showing some concern. That is not kazoda.
That does not satisfy the uniqueness of the human heart.
This intelligence, we have the ability, you see, to think deeper way, suffering nature. That automatically, you see, bring question or curiosity, whether there is possibility to eliminate the suffering or not. Then that immediately, you see, because of the interest, what's the causes of that? If causes of suffering can eliminate, then automatically, because of suffering, freedom can eliminate. Otherwise, no use, forget, and take rest, sleep. And alcohol, better. I think alcohol,
maybe alcohol.
Drugs. Once you find this is some sort of purpose, some goal, and as a result of this initial practice, immense benefit in terms of peace of mind. That immense benefit, well-being of physical. So, I think it is wise to think that way, rather than I something. That's foolish.
No.
Oh, sorry.
So with this jewel of personal advice, we take lunch.
Yes, lunch more important than meditation. Since everything is depend on this body, so fuel of this body's energy is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes.
And how that has an effect on attention, memory, and generally cognitive performance. Physical fitness, that improves cognitive ability, exercising, and such like that. Perception is shaped also by motor capacities of the body, our motor system, our ability to move. So first, let me make a distinction that comes from the phenomenological perspective between two different senses of the body. And here, it depends upon understanding that we can approach the body from two different perspectives. The third-person perspective, which is the perspective of science and medicine, studies the body, you might say, objectively, using scientific methods. So phenomenologists refer to this as the objective body that is studied in that way. From a first-person perspective, however, one can study our experience of the body, how we experience our own body. So this is the phenomenological study of the body as experienced, and this is usually referred to as the lived body. So the objective body is one thing. In the philosophical tradition of phenomenology, these are often treated as separate, different ways to understand the body. But we can take an interdisciplinary approach and use both third-person and first-person approaches and see if we can make sense of how the body, in effect, helps to shape our experience. So things like nutritional status, if we're hungry or not hungry, respiratory and autonomic processes, hormonal levels,
the reflexes,
emotional processes, postural and motor control processes. All of these things help to shape the way we experience the world. So, in contrast to a very long tradition in Western philosophy, a tradition that is characterized by dualism, which is sometimes referred to as the mind-body problem. It's the idea that the mind is something independent of the body. In contrast to that, contemporary theorists of embodiment, and for example, Francisco Varela was one of these, argue that experience and cognition depend upon the full body, not just the brain, and on factors associated with being in a physical and social environment. So the body in the environment, including, of course, the brain, is the full system that we need to look at. So,
embodiment kada supyu dan deoi tone de shi yaw reslo lewo janyang ton de.
Okay. This idea of extra neural processing.
So is Holiness right in thinking that from the dualist point of view, it's just the brain that does the job, the body has no role?
That's right. Yeah.
Now, dualist chidan tadan chebana.
Well, of course, the dualist might say that the mind is what's important. Of course, you can have someone who focuses on the brain, and they are not necessarily a dualist. But there's a kind of dualism between just the brain and the whole body as well in some contemporary theory. So the design of the body imposes constraints on the nervous system and the way it works. So the body is going to be doing some of the processing for our experience. There's a kind of pre-processing. So if we think of sensation coming in, input into the brain, it turns out that the location and the status of sense organs will affect the information that's going to the brain. For example, the shape and location of our ears will determine direction of sound by amplifying or filtering inputs. So before it even gets to the brain, the body is doing some of the processing of the information. Post-processing, so if you think of it in terms of output, motor output, movement is not entirely determined at brain level, right? It's re-engineered by the design of muscles and tendons.
Cuba.
No. Their degree of flexibility, their geometrical relationships to other muscles and joints, and their prior history of activation. So the body is doing some of the processing for our ability to act in the world and for our ability to experience the world. Body posture, and so there's a number of scientific studies to show that if subjects turn their head and eyes to one side just prior to making a judgment, a perceptual judgment about something, the direction of their turning will influence the accuracy and the reaction times of the cognitive performance. When subjects listen to a sentence with head and eyes turned to the right, their performance in recall is better than when they listen with head turned toward the left.
His Holiness is really wondering if that's true.
That's true.
So maybe the person whom this was tested may have a problem with the left ear.
I think they probably had controls when they did the experiment. What this is tied to brain lateralization, the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and things like that. So.
There's generally a saying in the Tibetan or Indo-Tibetan among the practitioners that not at the public level, among the practitioners, that those who kind of naturally tend to lean their head more towards the left are have a more compassionate kind of disposition and temperament. Those who tend to naturally lean their heads more to the right are more prone to kind of roughness and
I think even public level, I think those people who sort of much sort of proud, right?
Proud.
But particularly some scholars.
Oh yes.
Little beard. Solonus was giving a historical example, but he said, don't mention him.
Top secret.
It was a Tibetan scholar, yeah.
I'll try to keep my head towards the left and towards Your Holiness. Other experiments have shown that eye movement and arm movements can interfere with spatial working memory. We've heard a lot.
Yes.
I think.
I'll tell the story.
In order to waste of time, I think I may tell the story. When I say this, I think not important. Yeah, okay, good. One time in Peking, at that time, among my entourage, one of the best scholar which helping me for study, one Mongolian, very nice person, genuine practitioner, top scholar. So one day he participated somewhere, and there another Amdo scholar, very famous, and also well known, quite too much proud. So then next one occasion, I asked, well, what kind of a meeting, and who are there? Then the Mongolian scholar told me, Kishirora, there, and Okshutu Shishushasa.
So this philosophical assistant of His Holiness, who was a Mongolian scholar, he told His Holiness that there was Kishirabla there with his, very straight goatee beard stuck
high in the air, sticking out high in the air.
Yes. Okay. So eye movement, arm movements can interfere with spatial working memory, where you are trying to remember a series of spatial locations. So the movement itself will interfere with that. Also, the development of perceptual and cognitive abilities is enhanced in correlation to greater amounts of crawling and mobility in infancy. So the more the infant crawls, the development of their perceptual and cognitive abilities are improved. And of course, taking different postures as you move through the world, walking as opposed to crawling, changes spatial perception and attentional focus. Here's a study by Adele Diamond, where she does it's a wonderful review of this kind of thing. And she says the close connection between movement, motor development, and cognitive development is reflected in the closely connected functioning of the cerebellum and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Areas of the brain that are responsible for both kinds of functions, areas of the brain that include motor function and also cognitive function. So we can see that the body, of course, works with the brain, and nothing, of course, will be possible without the brain, but certainly the body has something to add to this. Physical fitness and cognition. Physical exercise provides benefits to executive control, as was shown recently in a study by Hillman and colleagues. Fitness is associated with better, more accurate cognitive performance through increased cognitive control. resulting in greater allocation of attentional resources. And these are experiments done with 9-year-old children. And there are many other studies that indicate the benefits of consistent physical activity on cognition across a variety of tasks and populations. I believe we mentioned something about this in our other discussions. Francisco Varela coined the term inactive cognition or inactive perception. And it means that we are actively engaged in the world. Our motor processes shape perception. So Varela's term is that cognition is inactive. So the sensory motor capacities of the body shape our mental and cognitive processes. Because the body is always situated in the world, the demands and possibilities offered by various environments contribute to our experience. In terms of, for example, the hands that we have help to define a pragmatic working area around our body. And that has significance for movement and action, but also for attention, what we pay attention to, and for accomplishing tasks, of course. It turns out that the position of one's hands, where we're putting our hands around us, has an effect on visual attention. Objects located near one's hands receive more visual attention. Also, we don't perceive objects simply in terms of shape, size, and distance, but in pragmatic terms, as things I can use. I can pick up or I can't pick up. I can grasp or I can manipulate with my hands. So, as strictly visual, size and shape of an object may vary across distance. So if we see the hammer in a far distance, it looks small. If we see it here, it looks larger. Right? But pragmatically, in terms of what we can do with our hands, that remains invariant. The perceived object is either something I'm capable of picking up or it is not. If you remember, Anne Trisman gave an example of the clarinet, right? And the person who suffered some brain damage was not able to say what it was, but was able to make the gestures. I understand that when you were younger, Your Holiness, you found a telescope and put it up on the roof of the Potala and looked at the moon. Galileo, of course, was one of the first people to use a telescope to look at the planets. And an interesting thing about his drawings of Venus, if you look here, this on the left, the small black and white figure, is what he could see through his telescope. Below that, you see the drawings that he made. It turns out the drawing he made of Venus contains details that he wouldn't be able to register visually. So his hand somehow or other caught something that the eye did not catch. So the photograph... I will.
Richard, His Holiness is just wondering, if he hasn't seen how he's writing and drawing them.
So I think the explanation is in terms of the two visual pathways. The ventral pathways is something that is conscious, that we recognize objects, when we see them. The dorsal pathway tends to be more unconscious, and it informs our motor system. So it tells our hands something more, perhaps, than what we can actually see and register.
Michel Doyo debegi lebe chashir lamka niores chik dorsal ta chik ventral. And it ventral the kandang jungus toya dan dewa shukcheche. And it dorsal the yanzo chik lugul de ya dewa shukchen gores. Tichi tegol chikchine yanko kaza kurang sheba longoto majubine chikute kyune. Then not your
So the hands are getting more information than registers visually at the conscious level. So that may be an explanation of why he could draw more than he saw. Right. So the picture on the right is through a modern telescope, and if you can see the detail, this is something of a ragged edge, and this is what he's picking up here in the drawing, a kind of ragged edge, which doesn't seem to be visible in the original. But all of this is an attempt to say that sometimes the hands seem to get more information and are smarter, in a sense, than the eyes.
But couldn't there be a simple explanation that he estimated that since the light is not going to be sharply cut, there's going to be some edges?
Yeah, it turns out, though, that the edges that he drew were accurate, according to the contemporary telescopes. So here's a summary of what I've said about embodiment. The body is responsible for extraneural processing. Posture and movement affect attention, memory, cognitive performance. Physical fitness improves cognitive ability, and perception is inactive. It is shaped by motor capacities of the body and the person's goals. In philosophy, contemporary philosophy, there is a thought experiment where philosophers talk about a brain being in a vat. The vat, which is a container full of liquids, chemicals to keep the brain alive. So this is a thought experiment.
Brain in a vat, lever and a
and the claim by philosophers in this thought experiment is that everything we need for cognition is in the brain, so that if we stimulate the brain in the right way.
Johannes, good morning. It seems like a dream. We're already on the last day. It went so fast, but that's usually a sign that we have been very engaged and time didn't pass as slowly as we normally have it. Today we're going to basically wind up the whole meeting, and we're going to make a presentation by a philosopher on the embodiment and intersubjectivity. Sean Gallagher is professor of philosophy at the University of Central Florida, and he has been doing a lot of research on different fields that have philosophical implications, and is the chief editor-in-chief of a journal on phenomenology and the cognitive science, which was founded by Natalie Depras and Francisco Varela. And Sean Gallagher has been working in different areas with Francisco Varela, so we're having almost a representation of Francisco here. So thank you, Sean, for coming and sharing.
Your Holiness, I would like to say what an honor it is to be able to come here and to be in dialogue with you. I would also like to thank the organizers of the Mind and Life Institute for inviting me, and I know how much hard work went into organizing a meeting like this. I would also like to note that my knowledge of Buddhism and meditation is really what I've learned here in the last few days. So I have just a little knowledge, but very high quality. I'm going to talk about two items, and I'll explain what I mean by embodiment and intersubjectivity. And I should say that I'm a
embodiment body. Then as intersubjectivity
Okay. And I will have some questions at the end. The questions will involve issues having to do with how the body might have an effect on meditation, and perhaps the effect that other people might have on meditation. So questions like, do posture and bodily movement affect meditational practice or experience? Is meditation different when it is practiced with others? But I'll come back to these questions. So here's an outline of what I will be talking about. I'll first talk about embodiment. And what I mean by that is how the body affects or helps to shape our experience and our cognition. Secondly, I'll talk about intersubjectivity. This is a term that comes from the phenomenological tradition in philosophy, and it means interpersonal social interactions having to do with such things. And there are basically two issues. One is called social cognition, which is studied in science, in psychology, and cognitive sciences. And the question is...
Can you explain what social cognition is? Yeah.
Well, it addresses the question of how we understand other people. So how do I understand your behavior and your mental states? And the second problem is one that I'll call shared sense-making. And that has to do with how others affect the way that we perceive the world and act in the world. So others have an effect upon us. So we want to look at how that happens. When we talk about embodiment, I'll go through a number of issues. I'll start by talking about phenomenology, which is a kind of philosophy, and the relationship between phenomenology and science with respect to the body.
The phenomenology is like
I'll talk about extraneural processing, so processing that goes beyond the brain and is done by the body. I'll talk about posture and movement,